Mom always told me to be a good boy, but the world said I could be anything I wanted to be, which is great, because I want to be a problem. No, I won't dive into sex, drugs, or gender confusion. To the world, that would make me a good little boy. I will learn formal logic and adhere firmly to the concept of objective truth. I will commit myself absolutely to the authority of the Word of God and make friends with Augustine, Luther, Calvin, Chesterton, Lewis, and the U.S. Constitution. I hope to grow up and love only one woman, a woman at least as clear-thinking and rebellious in this world as I will be, who knows where true beauty lies and who will never let me stop striving to be the biggest problem I can be. I will give my life for hers and aim to have a family large enough to require specialty automobiles. We will worship in a church unashamed of the gospel and live in a community of families doing the same. I will work myself to the bone providing for my family, and I will make sure my kids all fall in love with Narnia and Middle-earth, that they will all know how to think, that evolution will make them giggle, and rainbows will make them think of Noah and his arky-arky. Like I said, I will be a problem, immune to all that is hip and trendy and now, singing songs that are centuries old, savoring good wine and great whiskey, dancing and laughing and feasting while the enemies of God scowl and glower and shelter in place. Hey little boy, the world says, what do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be a metastasizing cancer of conservative Christian culture, devouring Marx's impotent progressive dream and building a resurrected Western world. I want to be a stomper of stupid sandcastles, an exposer of poisonous lies. I want my life to be a monument to the triune creator God who made us all. The kind of monument you and yours will never be able to tear down. Oh, and a fireman. Thanks for asking. New St. Andrews College. Liberal arts for outlaws.
There you go. Dr. Peter McCullough, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Ryan Cole. Who are we missing? Who are we missing?
Well, what we're missing first is that I was supposed to be starting the opening of the show because that's what you just tapped me on to tell me. But then you're going to interrupt me and start talking about like you starting to start a show. And I'm supposed to be starting to start a show because Pastor Toby still ain't here yet. No. Why do you take my job, man? That's so racist.
I wasn't.
It's the racist thing you've done on the show in a very long time. And let me tell you, you've done some pretty
bad things, huh?
I've been waiting for this moment for years to be able to have the good Dr. Robert Malone on the show. I've been waiting for this moment. And so hurry up. Let's get to it right away.
All right, this show is brought to you by Classical Conversations. Classical Conversations supports homeschooling parents by cultivating the love of learning through a Christian worldview and fellowship with other families. They provide a classical Christ-centered curriculum, local like-minded communities across the United States and in several countries, actually. Yeah. And they train parents who are striving to be a great classical educators in the home. For more information and get connected, please visit their website at classicalconversations.com. Again, that's classicalconversations.com.
Our day ones.
Love Dr. Robert, no, not Dr. Robert Borton.
Oh,
no, Dr. Robert Malone.
Why not?
It's just Robert Borton and what he's doing over there at Classical Conversations. So check it out. Like, as the good Chocolate Knox said, not the good Dr. Chocolate Knox.
Although I would take a doctorate. If somebody wants to give me an honorary doctorate, you can do that.
Dr. Malone was born October, apparently we have his bio. He was born on October 20th, 1959, is an American physician and biochemist. His early work focused on mRNA technology. Was he responsible for Operation Warp Speed?
Well, we'll find out.
Talk about it, Pharmaceuticals and drug repurposing research. Dr. Malone, thank you so much for finally coming on CrossPolitic.
I'm glad to be here. It's not because I was avoiding it in any way. We guess we hadn't connected.
Well, we're not that popular. We get it. We're not that important. Joe Rogan's way more important than we are. But listen, so my first question is this. I didn't find you until the pandemic started to take place and after the vaccines. You popped on the scene for me with the Joe Rogan interview, like so many others. And so my question was that there's been a lot of things that I followed you on since that moment of you being on the show. You've revealed so much about the vaccines and the healthcare industry. Where were you at before COVID happened, and how much of this was a revelation to you because of the plays that you started seeing happening through COVID? And were you this way before COVID happened, but you just didn't have a platform? What changed? What happened?
Well, I've always been who I am. I've had a rough time of it. This hasn't been, and my career has not been an easy thing for me. I started off as a carpenter and a farmhand, and worked my way up through community college and through UC Davis with a degree in biochemistry and an emphasis on molecular biology, and then had a MD PhD scholarship at Northwestern. My wife didn't like living in Chicago very much, and neither did I. And then we transferred to do my graduate work at UC San Diego in the Salk Institute. Jill and I grew up on the central coast of California in Santa Barbara. And there I was very focused on advancing in making use of the knowledge I already had having to do with retroviruses from my undergraduate years. I was in one of the laboratories that were right at the very forefront of the AIDS outbreak in 1983. And so I was well versed in retrovirology and the leading technology for use for gene therapy, which is what I wanted to do. I wanted to be a pediatrician that would heal children that had genetic inborn errors in metabolism. And the leading technology involved recombinant retroviruses for gene therapy. So I went to one of the top gene therapy labs in the world at the Salk Institute, that of Inventor, and managed to get in there. It's an incredibly competitive postdoctoral lab at the time in the Institute of Molecular Biology and Virology. And while I was there, I was asking questions about how to process and understand how RNA gets packaged into retroviruses. So I had to develop a bunch of technology to ask the questions. And that's what gave rise to the RNA vaccine technology as well as DNA vaccines. I was already schooled in vaccinology from my AIDS days, and I'd also worked with Robert Lamb at Northwestern on influenza viruses. And so that became my career. I had a series of discoveries at the Salk that led to 9 issued patents, but also led to a whole bunch of ugly academic politics with senior professors trying to take credit and wanting to get on the patents and all that kind of stuff. And I got caught in the crossfire, ended up with nervous breakdown and post-traumatic stress disorder. But I finished my MD and went back into academia, and I was an assistant professor and then an associate professor in pathology for many years, focused on non-viral gene therapy. So I kind of challenged the paradigm of using viruses for gene therapy, and particularly focused on using gene therapy technology for vaccines. And that was going along fine until the late 90s when I was at University of Maryland, Baltimore, when there was a death from gene therapy at UPenn from Mr. Jim Wilson, who overdosed a young child with an adenovirus vector, and the child went into disseminated intravascular coagulation, which is a form of shock, and died. Because the Professor Wilson had not respected the clinical trial protocol and had overdosed the patient, had continued to escalate because the patient hadn't responded to the lower doses. It turns out that there was a fundamental problem there, which is why that happened. But I was taking training in bioethics at the time, and my mentor told me, when I told him what I knew about the situation, he said I had an obligation to tell the world about this, about what I knew. And I knew that if I did that, it would destroy my academic career. But I went ahead and did it. And in fact, it did destroy my academic career. And I left the university, went to work for the Department of Defense, building a breast cancer research program and a research institute in Western Pennsylvania. So I entirely shifted my focus, but I kind of went underground, and I continued to be off the radar and underground pretty much for the rest of my career, because there was a lot of haters in academia. And I basically worked as a consultant and worked within Department of Defense and increasingly in biodefense, because that's the job I could get with a new company called Dyneport Vaccine Company. And I was actually associate clinical director in charge of virtually all biodefense agents for the Department of Defense. That's where I learned about the whole biodefense world. And this all happened right after 9/11, so it was pretty hot then. So I've worked on the smallpox vaccine, on anthrax vaccines, on vaccines for various respiratory viruses and neurologic viruses, et cetera, all the things that they believe they need to have for the warfighter.
Wow.
Protect them. And then I left Dyneport. I actually got laid off when Tony Fauci took over all the money for the anthrax vaccine. And I became a consultant, focused on regulatory affairs, took a fellowship at Harvard Medical School in global clinical research, and went about my business. I've been involved in multiple infectious disease outbreaks. I was at the tip of the spear in moving forward the Ebola vaccine and got that licensed to Merck. And that's now the licensed Merck Ebola vaccine. I worked very hard repurposing drugs for Zika with partners at the DoD. And then along came this one. And this was very different. The government obviously behaved very differently, used a lot of propaganda techniques, censorship, and other things that I'd never encountered before. And they started doing things under Operation Warp Speed that I had been taught were just illegal. And in particular, bioethics of forcing people to take these experimental products. I'm deeply trained in and experienced in regulatory affairs. And I understand exactly what the language is of the emergency use authorization and its limitations. And what was being done was just wrong. And it kind of came to a head when Steve Kirsch arranged for me to have a phone call with a Canadian physician who was reporting adverse events with the vaccine, and they were all being ignored and deleted. And furthermore, he told me on a Saturday evening teleconference about how the Canadian government was coercing children, which is an absolute no-no in terms of giving them ice cream and other things to try to get them to take the jab.
I remember that.
Yeah.
And I woke up, and I didn't know what I could do to help him, but I woke up the next morning and realized I could write an article about the bioethics of this and what was wrong. And I thought that was a safe area. I thought that talking about bioethics was clearly something I was qualified for. Nobody was talking about the bioethics of what was going on. They were very clear in terms of the law, as far as I was concerned. What was being done was clearly illegal. And so I thought I was on solid ground. And then that kind of set the whole thing in motion. So that's long before the Rogan hit. And even before the hit that I did with Steve Kirsch and Brett Weinstein on the Dark Horse podcast, which is really the one that brought me into public attention.
Right.
And you may or may not know that Brett and his brother Eric are close buddies with Joe. And so that's a big part of what led me to be invited down to Joe's studio and to do that infamous hit where I was setting up the Lincoln Memorial protests, the Stop the Mandate rally that was so successful in January. That was the whole purpose of that hit. But, unbeknownst to anybody, LinkedIn and Twitter decided to deplatform me like 2 days before the recording. And then Joe thought that it was such a good hit that he played it New Year's Eve and ran it, kind of accelerated it ahead of a lot of the other ones that he'd done that they had in the can. And that just went nuclear, broke the internet. Yeah. I talked about mass formation psychosis and the theories of my friend Matthias Desmet and the propaganda and what was going on in the hospitals and the perverse financial incentives that the government was creating. and all that stuff that I guess no one had ever heard before. And for me, it was just the thing that all of the physicians that I was working with were talking about. We were doing rallies and presentations. This is all stuff that we'd been talking about, but no one was really hearing it.
Right.
But then Joe Rogan has the biggest platform in the world, I think, hands down. And I've heard numbers of, in the range of 50 to 100 million views on that. It literally did cause Google to manually manipulate search results. It triggered a lot of the Silicon Valley censorship complex, and so that's the story of that.
Just a little bit about us when the pandemic started in March 2020. I think it was April, or by the end of April, we had found Dr. Jay Bhattacharya and Dr. Ryan Cole. Dr. Jay,
I just did a hit with Jay a couple days ago.
Okay, nice. He's told me this multiple times. He said we were the first ones to platform him after, with the exception of his own internal Stanford interview with.
That's how I found him. Was the Stanford
interview. And so we instinctively and theologically knew that something was wrong. We knew theologically that the government didn't have authority from God to tell people when to go to work and when not to go to work and what to wear on their face. I mean, that's just Bible 101 stuff. And then we kind of instinctively knew that something's broken here when something's broken in our culture and our politics, that this is starting to go crazy. I mean, Fauci, you know the deal. Fauci in March was saying, masks don't work on 60 Minutes. And then a month later, 2 months later, he was saying, yeah, you need to wear masks. And then 6 months later, you need to double up on masks. And so when you came out on the Joe Rogan, I think some people had kind of known, I agree with you, that people weren't listening like they should. But when you came on Joe Rogan and with your background and came out and said what you said, it was like a breath of fresh air. And you were able also to put terminology to the mass psychosis thing. You were able to explain things in a way that we kind of knew something was going on, but that terminology, I remember my wife caught your interview first and put me onto it. And you were able to really explain a lot of things that were okay, that's what's going on.
Yeah, Matthias has told me that I'm the only one that he's aware of that has accurately summarized his ideas. He's become a good friend. Mm-hmm. And I visited him in his home. We spent time together in southern Spain, shooting a movie, etc. He's been here. He stayed in our farm. But that's that. Thank you for that comment. I've tried. I guess that's one of the advantages of having been basically a farmer and a carpenter when I was younger. And I think we are on our fifth small farm. We run a small farm here and we produce a high quality horse. And Virginia is a purple state.
Yeah.
Which means you kind of got to get along with everybody. Yeah. And it has a strong conservative and religious component. Matt and Mercedes Schlapp live about 15 miles north of here. There's some, they're the people that run CPAC.
Yeah.
There's some hardcore conservatives in Rappahannock County in Northern Virginia that have brought us into their world.
Yeah.
But I may go on the podcast with you, but earlier today I was chatting up one of my neighbors who has to swap in the new Allison on my dually GMC 3500.
Yep.
And before that, I was talking to the guys that are busy doing the body work to cut out the rot in my rocker panels. And, I went up to Kubota to pay my bill for the tractor parts. So I got to get along with everybody. I got to live in the world.
Right.
I don't have not to trash Jay, but he's a great example. And Jay and I get along great. And I understand his academic world. I used to live in it. I don't like it very much. But it's been a weird world for me because I cross all these different disciplines. And one of the good things that's good about it, that's helpful about that, is I can talk to people. I can talk to academics and I can talk to politicians. and I can talk to the guy that cuts my hay, and he loves to have a good long tongue wag with me from time to time. And I personally, I love it. I love being able to just interact with a wide range of people, listen to them, learn from them. And of course, key to that is treating them with respect.
Sure.
And that's kind of one of my fundamental principles. And I've absolutely been embraced by the Christian community. And I got to tell you, I think the next major thing I want to do is to reread the New Testament. The other day I was at a presentation from one of my conservative buddies on the city of David and the archaeologic excavations that are going there. All that stuff is real. I mean, it's real.
That's right.
Jesus walked on those steps, and went up to the Temple Mount. I mean, it's real.
Yeah.
And it's not some myth. It's solid. And as I think all the way through this COVID crisis, and come to grips with, for instance, the true evil that we've all encountered. I mean, it is evil. And whether you want to ascribe it to Lucifer or Marxism and utilitarianism, it's evil. And the best language and metaphors to understand all this, in my experience, have come from the Bible, and particularly the New Testament, all the way to the journey of Jesus and the things that he encountered in that journey as someone who was a truth teller, and someone who was committed to sharing a message of peace, and who became betrayed. In the famous Last Supper, I think that I really have to go back and read that, because I think that there's a lot of lessons there that I can take home that may help me to adapt to this weird world we're in right now.
Dr. Malone, you actually, I have an ad to read, but it's actually, you just led me really well into that ad. So thank you for our sponsors.
It's like he's a part of the show.
He's like part of the show doing
We
this.
got a seat for you over here, Dr. Malone.
Yeah, exactly. Come in here and sit down. And maybe Dr. Malone and his wife want to take a little vacation.
Out to Moscow?
Out to Kentucky.
Oh.
My ad read is actually, we have for those who listen to us, we actually do a national conference, usually on the East Coast. And this year, Dr. Malone, just so you know, that our conference this year is at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky. The Ark Encounter is kind of this life-size replica of the Ark.
Yeah, I'm aware of it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. So this year's conference is the Politics of Six-Day Creation. And the Politics of Six-Day Creation establishes the authority and sufficiency of God's word for all of life. From what is a man or a woman, when does human life begin, and how is human society best organized? Come here, Ken Ham, Pastor Doug Wilson, Dr. Ben Merkel, Dr. Gordon Wilson, in the dance. Right in the dance, yeah. Gordon Wilson. Toby, we're going to do a live show.
He will actually be there at the
Joe
conference.
Rigney, and so much more. We kicked the conference off on a Wednesday night with Beer and Psalms.
By the way, this is starting earlier.
Yeah, this is starting a day earlier. Wednesday night, Beer and Psalms. Before that, we're going to do a corporate partner and friends event and do a whiskey bourbon tour.
Is the tour happening?
We're making sure it can happen. We're checking into the logistics. And then we're going to be doing Beer and Psalms on Wednesday night. Thursday, we have a pre-business conference.
Yep.
And then Thursday night, the conference kicks off with Pastor Toby, Ken Ham the next day. It's a packed full conference. But the reason why we started it a day earlier this year, so everyone can have time to go visit the Ark Encounter, which is about a 3-4 hour experience, and the Science Museum, which is again about a 3-4 hour experience. So mark your calendars for October 11th through the 14th as we fight, laugh, and feast with Beer and Psalms, our amazing lineup of speakers, our Rowdy Christian merch, and a Sabbath feast at the Ark to wrap up the occasion. And the Ark was symbolic of an infant baptism. So, Baptist, we'll talk about that. Visit fightlaughfeast.com. for more information. So Dr. Malone.
Well, I mean, no. I get the next question.
Okay.
Put your mic down. I'm going to mute it.
I'm done.
Doc, okay, I have so many questions I want to ask you. We don't have time for all of them. But the one, there's a couple that's pressing, but I think the one that's most important to me, I am getting annoyed now. I think, not annoyed, but we were so, for us here at CrossPolitic, we were so early in the pandemic conversation. We were talking about it. We were trying to tell people not to shut down their businesses.
Don't shut down their church.
Masks don't work. If it really is a real problem, you're going to get it. If you think a mask is going to protect you, it's not going to work. There was so much information that we had post the pandemic to tell us those things. So we
30 years of scientific literature.
Danae Rancourt on all death mortality, right?
All cause mortality.
And so there's so many things that were there. So we've been a part of this conversation forever. So it feels like in one sense, for us anyway, now that things are somewhat back to normal, that all of this is in one sense is over, right? And so the talk that people are still having about it seems like, I want to get back to building. I want to get back to building something that is obviously whatever we had built before wasn't enough. It didn't have enough strength to hold up against the tyranny that we had. Right. And so I want to get back to building. I want to get back to getting to work. But I want to ask you, with all that you've been through and everything that you've seen, how then shall we live in a post-COVID world?
Okay, two key things. One specifically relates to your community. Myself, Ryan Cole, and the rest of us have been traveling all over the world. And Matthias Desmond. By the way, Matthias is deeply spiritual. Unfortunately, I did a great recording here, a group recording, and the audio is horrible. So we didn't get the mics good enough.
Send it over.
And so I can't use the footage.
Send it over. Send it over.
Send
we
it
might
to
be able
me.
to fix
I'll
it.
fix it for you.
Okay. Well, so the communities of faith all over the world have been the most resistant to this crowd psychosis phenomena, to the hypnosis and the psyops and propaganda that's been deployed on all of us. And I think it's a combination of their faith, the grounding in Judeo-Christian ethics in particular, but it's also true in Muslim communities. And the fact that they are part of strong communities, and that's the bridge that I want to key off of. We're heading, in my opinion, I don't want to sound apocalyptic, but our opponents have been planning what they have been deploying on us for decades now. And anyone that reads Event 2030 looks at what's happening in the World Health Organization and the international health regulations they're trying to jam through our throat and everything else, you will come to terms with the fact that this is long planned. David Martin has been who's a good friend. He lives very close here. He's buying a farm just by Jefferson's old place. And we went to the ballpark the other day to watch the Nationals get whipped by the what was it? I want to say the Rattlesnakes.
Seattle. Seattle.
The Arizona team.
Arizona Cardinals.
And we had a good chat on the way up and the way back. Martin has really done a good job of documenting and discussing the whole planning that went into the COVID crisis and manipulation associated with it. And he just did another hit on this through London Real that's worth watching. And then he, of course, did a fantastic job as the lead speaker at our recent International COVID Summit at the European Parliament in Brussels, that's been seen by something between 2 and 3 billion people at this point. So it's actually quite a bit larger, the distribution, than the Joe Rogan hit. So it's quite clear that this was a series of things that have been in planning phase for a very long period of time were deployed. And Dave Martin makes the point that he thinks that this was a crime against humanity, and it was basically an act of war against humanity that occurred over the last 3 years. And I think there's merit to his argument. But what that means is that these people, the World Economic Forum, the large financial backers that are behind this, the WEF in conjunction with the United Nations, they're not stepping back. They're not cutting back on the throttle. They're accelerating things. They've been kind of forced out into the open, and their response isn't, oops, we've been caught, or oops, we screwed up. Their response is, we got to double down hard. The upshot of that is that those folks of us, and it may be only 10%. I mean, there's a case to be made that there's only 5 to 10% of people that really value freedom. And most people want to be told what to do. That's no question.
Yep.
For those of us that live in communities and value freedom and value our communities, we're going to have to really buckle up and focus on community building, building our infrastructure and capabilities. You mentioned children. Homeschooling is a key component of that.
Yeah.
And move towards a future in the near term where we're even more self-reliant.
Yep.
And it's a hard thing to say, but from where you guys are coming from, I suspect you're already living it. And that I think is the path forward. It's Dave Martin comes from fundamental Amish and Mennonite roots, by the way, and he'd be a good person to have on your show one of these days.
Yeah.
But for those of us that have this background in farming and agriculture and live in kind of small town rural communities, we generally get it. The big city folks and the bicoastal politicians are not our friends, and the plans that they have for us may all sound good from Brussels or from Washington or from New York City or San Francisco, but they don't generally sound very good for those of us that live in the way that we do and that value freedom. We don't really want to be told what to do, and that if you think through living in a world of intentional communities, as I suspect you already do, there's a whole bunch of problems you have to solve. Now, the Amish have shown us that they can be solved.
Right.
The Amish are very self-reliant. But they also show us that intentional communities can't be too big, that there's problems with barter as a system. I mean, one of the problems that we're going to have to solve is, how do we enable trade? What do we use? And if the currency becomes digital currency that's centrally controlled, so central bank digital currency that allows them to control us in so many ways, as we saw they will do at the drop of a hat with the Toronto truckers.
Yeah.
You know, how do we solve that problem of trade and exchange among these intentional communities that are going to have to be built? And many people think that decentralized cyber currency is the solution. That or precious metals, or, you know, it goes on. That's a big problem. How do you get your medical care? How do you educate your kids? All those things are going to have to be solved, and we're going to have to work together to find those solutions. But the core thing is community, building community, commitment to community, having a set of common principles and ethics that you can all agree on. And from my point of view, the Judeo-Christian ethical framework is one that has withstood the test of millennia. And there is no reason, all of this, you know, we need to get rid of religion. We need to get rid of Christianity. Those are obsolete concepts. And we need to move towards this bundle of things that we call wokeism. That's a great big experiment that's going to fall flat on its face. It's going to take a generation or two with it, like we already see the huge damage.
That's right.
To the young people right now from the school shutdowns. And somehow we've got to be, the classical intentional community, as far as I'm concerned, is the monasteries in the Middle Ages. Amish communities are another one, of course, but somehow we're going to have to find a way to tunnel through time while a lot of bad stuff is happening around us, maintain our integrity, continue to value human dignity, continue to build community and respect for each other, and communities based on a ethical framework that allows us to maintain our integrity and to avoid this dark future that we see portrayed in so much of science fiction. The Mad Max world, where it's warlords and everybody is just trying to get what they can for themselves. That's a dark, ugly future. It's not one I want to live in. It's not one I want my children to have to live in. And the only way out, I fear, I'm sorry to sound so dark, is to build intentional communities and rely on each other. And like I said, one of the frameworks that seems to work best all over the world is communities of faith. It's been time tested.
And here's the thing, God built the world in a certain way. And when he cut with the grain, and part of that grain is building community that God cut. And when you build and construct your community around the way he built the world, that's where you're going to find peace. That's where you're going to find life. That's where you're going to find thriving life. I actually think over the next 20 to 40 years, I think we're in a fight. I think COVID 2020 is very clear that we're kind of in this, new battle for what it means to be a human, even, kind of thing. Yeah. But when you design, we like to use Nassim Taleb's terminology, anti-fragile. When you design kind of your life in an anti-fragile way, and that is cutting with the grain of how God built the world, you're going to be more anti-fragile when things get tough and when things get hard.
It's fascinating you mentioned that. Charlie Kirk sent me that book.
Okay. Yeah,
it's a great book.
Yeah, and that guy and Nassim Taleb was so fragile during COVID, which is super sad. Kind of watching.
I think there's another thing too to be said that, and I always remember this because of David Bahnsen. He reminds me of this. Is that at least here in America, one thing has been true. So, Dr. Malone, I don't know if you know this, Gabe was one of the people who got arrested during the pandemic when our church was outside singing psalms. And I don't know if you've probably seen Donald Trump, the president, retweeted Gabe's arrest. Yeah. It was one of the, we were out there protesting with singing psalms.
Not standing 6 feet apart, not wearing a mask
rejecting
in our
all
city.
In our city. But one of the things that's come from that is that through the courts and through it all set up, we won the legal case that this was right to do, and it was wrong for the city to stop us from doing it. Yep. We are not so far gone that we can't get it back. And a lot of it is going to happen at a very local level, like you were talking about, being very intentional where we are, where God's placed us with our churches, and being able to engage right there and not letting the local politics be at the place where it says we only think of the federal environment. Yeah. We have a place to win at a local level because of our setup, and we don't need to give that up just because we have some bumps here and there. Stand there, stand in the gap and fight. And this is not something that we can't win. We are in the best place out of all the places in the world with all the globalism that's happening and the push from the World Economic Forum and the whole. I think America still has the best chance because of the Christian setup of the nation that has given the division of powers. There is real authority in our local level. There's real authorities with our sheriffs. There's real authority with our city councils. There's real authority with our churches.
With mom and dad.
And the real authority with our families. Yeah. And where we build those structures tight, then we have a place to fight from that begins to make everything fall into its proper place. So I don't think we should give that up at all. And I agree with you. We need to get way more solid on that. Dr. Malone, I know we've run out of time, but I want to thank you for coming on the show. Twitter is a good place. Substack is a good place to follow you. Where else can people follow you at?
Well, we do have the Malone Institute, which has a lot of the things about the World Economic Forum and more lengthy stuff. So that's maloneinstitute.org. Okay. And but the main ones are Twitter, Getter, Gab, Truth Social, at RW Malone MD. And Substack is what keeps us alive. It's what brings, allows us to buy tractor parts and feed the horses. And that's rwmalonemd.substack.com. You don't have to subscribe. Okay. The people that subscribe, which is a small subset of our totals,
Yep.
Are gratefully appreciated. They are the customers that I focus on, the paying subscribers. But anybody can subscribe for free. I know not for a lot of people, $5 a month is a big deal, and we're not keeping information away from anybody. So if you subscribe, it'll come into your email inbox. And unless you're using a Microsoft product for some reason, then it might well go into your junk mail.
Well, Dr. Malone, if there's anybody that I want having a voice out there, you're definitely one of the top people. So I really appreciate you and the work that you've done. Very grateful. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you for your support and your kind words.
Yes.
And I look forward to our next chat.
Absolutely. If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until next time, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight, laugh, and feast. This is CrossPolitic.